Welcome to our Decarcerating Care panel. Really glad to be here with you all tonight for our panel, Strategy, Struggle, and Sustained Commitment. My name is Nze Gokul. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the program manager at IDHA, and I'm a brown person with long black hair. I have a brown shirt on, and behind me in my background, I have a white wall with a brown poster. I'm going to jump right into it because I know that there's going to be a lot said, and I want to make sure we have the time for it. So I wanted to start off with a grief and genocide acknowledgement. Lately, I've been feeling a lot of grief in the events in the world, and specifically around what's happening in Palestine, and also just the grief that's really just felt inside personally on so many levels to the just kind of the shifts that are happening. So I think we want to, attune to that in this space tonight, as there's so many different shifts happening in the world, politically, ecologically, and all of this has an effect on us. And so, thinking about Palestine, Congo, Sudan, all of these places that are experiencing genocide, and how this really affects our panel conversation tonight as well. And this grief is also really welcome in this space to be felt. And I want to give some shout out to Saila for directly inspiring this kind of acknowledgement. So wanted to do a accessibility overview. We have closed captioning available. So if you'd like to turn on captions, this is in the bottom right of your screen in the Zoom. You can see the show captions button. To turn this on, to access the full transcript, you can also click the arrow and to show that. Also, there is ASL interpretation. We have two lovely interpreters available joining us, Vania and Kaylee. So thank you so much for being here. And would like to also share about the technology in chat. We have Nia doing tech in the chat for any technical issues. We're also recording this event, so we'll have all of that to share for all of the registrants later. And you also are invited to join in the conversation in the chat. But also keep in mind that it does tend to be very active. So, you can click out of it and hide that. And we also will send out an anonymized transcript of the chat in the follow-up. Also with the questions, panelists may not be able to answer all the questions that arise, but we do save these questions and hope that people can engage with them beyond this panel. I'm going to share briefly about who we are, the Institute for the Development of Human Arts. We are a community of current and prior mental health service users and survivors, psychiatrists, psychologists, other clinicians, activists, artists who come together to transform mental health care. And what we do is advance critical, effective, and scalable alternative approaches to mental health through collaborative education and community development. And we're bringing together experiential and academic knowledge to shift power dynamics in the system and challenge the idea that only those who work in the field of mental health are experts. So to guide our discussion tonight, here are our community agreements. So the first one is shared expertise and wisdom. Everyone brings their own expertise to the conversation. We all gain from and respect each other's various expertise. Collective liberation. Overcoming oppression aids everyone's liberation. It is our responsibility to challenge various forms of prejudice. We educate in the spirit of solidarity and hold each other accountable without criticizing who we are as people. And listen like allies. We respect a wide diversity of choices and perspectives, and even when we disagree, we don't judge or invalidate other people's experiences. And agreements also apply to the chat, and so we have our team member, Jesse, to moderate and uplift these agreements if needed. I wanted to also talk about conflict and harm. So we do expect polyphony and disagreement to show up in this space. So our community agreements are designed to help navigate these moments. And so we also wanted to invite you to notice in your body during this panel, where do you feel tension? Is this from learning new ideas? Is this because something was said or done in a way that reinforces oppression? And then also we have a harm response form where you can share something that you experience in this space if you would like the IDHA team to address it. I wanted to thank Spring Up for helping develop this approach to conflict and harm. So for the panel follow-up, we have an email that we'll send out to all the registrants with a recording of the panel, a closed caption transcript, a chat transcript, a reading resource list, how to stay in touch with the panelists, and a feedback form. So just to give a brief overview of the format, I'm gonna, in a second, pass to our moderator, Nze, and then we will have panelist introductions, and then the discussion, and if we have time, we'll have some Q&A. So that is all from me, and with that, I will pass it to our moderator to do some introductions. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Decarcerating Care. And tonight we are going to be discussing strategy, struggle, and sustained commitment. My name is Nze Okoronta. I use they, them pronouns. And in my 9-to-5 job, I am the co-director of a peer respite, non-carceral peer support warm line. And I see myself, first and foremost, as a human being. I'm a MAD identified. I'm a psychiatric survivor. I'm a writer, trainer, and a facilitator. And I'm really excited to be here with you all as we talk about not just like decarcerating care, but decarcerating movement, decarcerating advocacy, activism, and also want to take kind of a MAD perspective on decarcerating the panel itself. For a visual description of me, I am a biracial Afro-American person of Igbo descent. I have my hair in an Afro hairstyle. I'm wearing a Jean-Michel Basquiat shirt, also who comes from a legacy of psychiatric survivorship. And I really resonate with that story and that person. Yeah, I'm just really excited to dive in and hear from all of our panelists tonight, especially given just the state of the world. Before we hopped on, we were all chatting and there was this collective feeling of just tiredness. And I just want to invite that in to the discussion too. As you share in the chat, there's really not enough space for things like grief and sorrow and fear and rage. We hear so much about joy and pleasure and rest, and those things are so important. But also the world is just on fire. And, underneath fascism and authoritarian control and the increased surveilling of policing and harm to, people like us, marginalized, and those who are most impacted by systems. I'm really excited to hear from and be in conversation with all the folks here tonight, and also talk about what it means to decarcerate ourselves, decarcerate the way we care for each other, the way we see community, and also discuss, how policing shows up in many forms. Reading the description of this event, I was really inspired, especially in discussion around how policing and incarceration, manifests in things like involuntary commitment, non-consensual and coercive police interactions. And the majority of my work is focused in that space. And also, I think I'm super excited to hear from the breadth of our panel. Really is a combination of folks that come from different disciplines, different experiences and things that span beyond professionalized clinical or even academic contexts. I know in the chat I saw we have, activists here, community members. We have people that are coming in with lived experience, with their own expertise, and really hope to have a fruitful discussion that really decenters, or not decenters, but shifts focus away from just traditional understandings of knowledge and learning and wisdom. I'm a second generation immigrant. My father was subsequently incarcerated and then deported, and I have my own experiences with psychiatric systems. And so as we kind of dive into this discussion today, I hope we're also speaking about decarcerating care in a broader context than just systemic transformation, and really talking about relational transformation, community transformation, familial transformation, and generational healing, whatever that looks like. So I am really excited to introduce or have our panelists introduce themselves, first and foremost as people, and also share about their roles. I'm going to open it up now for them to do some introductions. And as a reminder, for each of the panelists, just take a few minutes, share your name, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, who you are, not just what you do, and then give us a brief description. And then we've got this first question, what movement lineages are you grounded in? How are you reinterpreting, evolving, or carrying them forward in your work? And waiting for our panelists to come on camera here. We will start with Olka.
Hello, everyone. My name is Olka Baldeh. I use they, them, she, her pronouns. I'm calling in today from Southern Mississippi, the land of the Choctaw people. I am the Director of Advocacy and Outreach for Trans Lifeline. Outside of my day job, I'm a farmer, a beekeeper, an herbalist, and a poet. Today, first of all, I'm a Black person with cinnamon colored skin like the spice. I got long dreadlocks that are today half up, half down. The half down side is careening down my right side. I got bead earrings on, and my background is a virtual background that's like a glorious woods, vineyard, mountain, sunshine kind of view. Very excited to be here with you all today. And the movement lineages that I'm grounded in, that I'm carrying forward with me, are Black liberation movements that include the women of the Black Panther Party, Black feminism by way of the Combahee River Collective, the Marronage of enslaved people and indigenous communities, queer liberation movements, the work of Afrofuturists, and indigenous rights of nature and land back movements. Nice to meet y'all. I'm so excited to be here and to continue to talk about our intersectional understandings of how we get to liberation as a collective together. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Autumn Blackdeer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be in conversation with y'all this evening. My ancestors have also likewise told me that, before you just start telling people what you know, tell them who you are, right? Where you come from. So Torno Ndonshebe, my name is Autumn Blackdeer. I'm a mighty member of the Southern Cheyenne Nation, based here in Denver, Colorado, where I'm at currently. I am, if we're doing, I think I describe myself as caramel colored. I'm a caramel colored person. I have red hair. I'm wearing a red shirt. I have big round glasses, and I'm in front of a virtual background that vaguely resembles the woods in Twilight. So pretty kind of moody feeling. I think for me, the movement lineages that I draw on are definitely from an indigiqueer perspective. I hold my indigeneity and my queerness as essential to navigating the world and to really try to uplift how we are, occupying space, bringing forward our relatives that are from the past, but also making a better future for our generations that are up and coming. So I think queering time and also Indigenous versions of space and time go hand in hand for me. And so I think for me, I'm always thinking about how I can be a good relative today, how I'm honoring my ancestors that came before me and made it possible for even me to even be here today. So currently I serve as an assistant professor here at the University of Denver. Um, but I don't want to like paint myself as an academic because I'm definitely very much more grounded in um, scholar activism and really participating in Indigenous community events and really trying to bring forward the voices of Indigenous folks that are often silenced or marginalized, right? And so I don't want to fully ascribe to the academic perspective. So I'll hold space for both. And yeah, I'm excited to be in conversation with folks tonight and appreciate just even naming the heaviness of the world of uh, just even trying to do this work, I think, at a time like this where, so often folks ask us to be their sort of hope pornography, I think, like, oh, lift us up, make us feel better, show us how you're being resilient, right? Um, and so I love that we're starting off and saying, we're tired, we're grieving. And when do we get space to do that, right? Like when are we ever allowed our full humanity? So I appreciate starting off with that and really looking forward to being here with y'all. Thank you.
I think I am next. Luke Sakinyi, he, him pronouns. I am joining you all from Albany, New York. I myself am the VP of Public Policy at the Alliance for Rights and Recovery. Aside from my work, I am a family member and a child of immigrants and first-generation American here, which I think has really colored sort of my view on really fighting for inclusion, fighting for what we know is right, and the need to consistently strive for better for both this generation and future generations, considering all that past generations have done to get us where we are and making sure that we do not go back. I would say as far as movement lineages that I really work in and try to continue would be the civil rights movement, Black liberation, as well as disability rights and justice movements, particularly looking at how we can take what was won in the past and further that, particularly when it comes to mental health and substance use, looking at making sure that we don't go back to institutionalization, continue to provide folks the opportunity to live and learn and be happy in their communities of choice, really considering inclusion and providing more opportunities to utilize non-medical model services that are so effective for folks and really based in that mutual support system. And I think a lot of that really comes, as far as reinterpreting that, really comes about making sure, one, that we don't go back, as I mentioned before, but also how we can further that inclusivity to make sure that we don't have the stigma of having disabilities that really prevent us from living the lives that we really want to. Pause there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emmy O'Brien. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm calling in from my office in Midtown Manhattan on Lenape in Algonquin territory. I work as a psychoanalyst and a candidate information and private practice psychotherapist. And I also write books and teach at NYU and do other things on the side, organized with my union and a magazine called Pinko. My visual description, I'm a white trans woman in my 40s with an asymmetric red bob, wearing glasses and a gray shirt, collared shirt, and in the background is my shadowy office with some pieces of art and a couch and a chair. So in terms of movement lineages that I'm grounded in, I'm really deeply moved tonight thinking about the history of trans people joining in mass popular rebellions against racial capitalism and drawing on the strategies of trans survival that have been put together on the streets and against police violence and against poverty that sometimes have synced up or joined in much broader popular rebellions around the AIDS crisis, around the uprisings of the 1970s, around the George Floyd rebellion, and other kind of key moments where trans people are really joined in broader anti-capitalist and anti-racist movements. And I will, I think that covers, yes. And I will pass it on to Sean.
Thanks, Amy. My name is Sean. I use he and they pronouns. I'm currently in Portland, Maine, near the Casco Bay, original land of the Wabanaki people, but I'm not from here. I'm actually from Western Massachusetts, land of the Nipmuc and Pecumtuck in Northampton. So I'm hoping my internet connection will be okay. It's a bit dicey. I'll just give an image description. I'm a white man, a little pink right now because I'm a little nervous. So, but glad to be here. And I have short hair, a little scruff, wearing a black shirt with a turquoise tank underneath. And my background image is a flame and a candle on asphalt. And I'll probably explain why at some point. But that's keeping me grounded in, I guess, like who I am right now as I'm speaking to you. Yeah, I have like 4 or 5 jobs right now. That's partially why I'm tired. I'm tired also because there's just sort of unending, I feel like in my body right now, unending grief in the world, but also unending possibilities. And I'm sitting with both those things on this call today. But yes, for a long time, I worked for, and I still work for the Wildflower Alliance, peer-led organization in Western Massachusetts. The thing I did most, which has become a ritual to me, was helping lead an Alternatives to Suicide peer support group for about 10 years, which is allowing me as a suicide attempt survivor and someone that struggles with suicidal thoughts still, a place to figure out how to get through, how to survive and find meaning in those experiences. But these days, I also do training. That's why I'm in Maine for Wildflower Alliance. But some of my work is also around transformative justice. So I work for this line called A Call for Change, taking calls from people who have done harm and are looking to change. And that's been also kind of some sacred work for me. And I did work for a city government for a while, which is why sometimes people want me to talk about that. Working on an Alternatives to Police program, but it didn't really feel like it worked. Maybe I'll talk more later. And right now I'm also putting a lot of my energy into more mutual support work. Just as I've been on this call, I've been getting texts from people alongside me who are trying to support a queer elder who's coming out of psych incarceration. And just, it's both great and scary because I don't know where the supports are all the time. So that's why I'm tired, but I'm also, I play music. I love playing music. I have my guitar with me, you can't see it, but that's what keeps me grounded. And I'm thinking more about playing music as a form of ritual and a form of release and a form of imprinting important things in my life and for other people. So, and just checking the chat here. I see there's a hand up from the interpreter. I'm not sure if that's, okay. Well, I'll just say, yeah, I outside of life work, I love to be in the woods, and I love to play music with folks. So as far as lineages are concerned, I'm really moved by what other people have shared. I also feel very indebted to the MAD liberation movement, and also the lineages of harm reduction that come from mostly queer and trans people of color, which I know I feel grateful to be using in my life. Harm reduction when it comes to drugs, when it comes to sex, and just it's what's kept me surviving as a queer person in the world. But I feel very impacted by the Black liberation movement, disability justice, things that inform who I am too. I guess I'll leave it there. It's really great to be here with all of you tonight.
Thank you, everyone. So honored to be here. Thank you for your introductions, like sharing who you are, beyond even just what you do. And yes, like being in the tiredness with me and everyone here and the folks in the chat, I saw really resonating too. We're going to kick it off with our first question. What practices or organizing strategies have you seen be most effective in challenging coercive mental health interventions or other oppressive systems? What made them work and what lessons can we draw from them today? And just in the quick note, I love what Dr. Blackdeer said about queering time. Let's like make the panel also queer and mad, and just like even breaking down the question, like I already heard someone say music, like I think strategies and practices don't have to be these really big esoteric academic things. They can just be like the things I do to survive. So just want to also broaden that question for y'all. And to also queer and mad in the panel, I am not going to assign someone to start. I'm going to trust you all to speak freely. So please come off mute and talk to each other.
I think everyone seems to be too kind here, waiting for the first person. But I think what I will say is, from an organizing strategy, I think coalition building and sort of finding allies, friends to go with you when you are advocating across lines. I think one of the things that will likely be quite clear from this group of folks, as well as in the field, is that a lot of us are pushing for very similar things. I think everyone wants that inclusion, belonging, and just the ability to be. And I think when we think about it that way, we have far more allies and really showing up in that strength in numbers sort of mentality, so that we can really effectively show that this isn't just a couple of people yelling in the streets, calling for something that just affects them, but for thousands, millions of people, this is really critical to their lives, and that we'll band together to push against oppressive systems. I think when it comes to oppression, the number one tool of the oppressor is to separate people, because it's much easier to push oppression when people are separated and when people don't have the ability to communicate with each other and come as one unit to really push for changes. And we saw that, thinking about, civil rights movement and disability rights movements that I mentioned before, that was quite clear about it. I think having folks who, were fighting for Black liberation who themselves weren't Black really shows how important it is to the nation, to the world, and not just about one group or the other, but rather knowing that a rising tide lifts all boats, and making sure that we force that tide to rise as much as possible.
I think one practice that I've seen be really effective in just challenging coercive mental health generally is the centering of the experiences and the expertise of people with lived experience, psychiatric survivors, who can literally speak to the experience of psychiatric incarceration, of police intervention and interaction in the experience. We have, from the reality of people's stories being undeniable, been able to see small shifts, right? Whether it just be the shift in language, whether it be major professional organizations now acknowledging oh, police intervention is harmful and maybe that shouldn't be a thing. I think the centering of people's lived experiences and their stories is really something that is beginning to shift the tide, even in just how mental health care is talked about, even if folks, places, people in power not necessarily shifting kind of the everyday tangible realities and practices. Even the invention of 988, which we at Trans Lifeline critique a lot, right? The actual language in the bill was talking about LGBTQIA+ people, was talking about folks who are underserved, like in the language of this thing that was supposed to be for crisis care, or is supposed to be. I could talk more about that, but you know, that is something that I think we can see that that culture work, that story work is changing the tides.
This is Sean. I feel inspired by what you just shared, Olka, and I want to add some perspectives too. In our communities in Western Massachusetts, there's been a lot of after the Floyd uprisings, like city governments, you know, asking people like, well, why do we not want to invest in policing? And like maybe some well-intentioned solicitations for the people most impacted to like give testimony, but without protections and without like a sense of like how people would care for each other by like being so vulnerable as like Black folks, disabled folk, trans folks. And I feel like that's some of the struggle that I find with strategy too, is like, I want to make sure that when people, or myself even, when I'm sharing parts of my vulnerable self, like I'm not overexposing myself, or like it's not the first time that I'm sharing this part of my life. And so what has felt really important in our communities, or for me at least, is making sure that we have like ongoing, robust, caring peer support spaces that people can both just seek out in general, but maybe return to when taking risks to share. And that's something we've talked a lot in our kind of grassroots groups when we're trying to push like governments and institutions that maybe don't want to do much for us to do something. But more importantly, I guess I want to just acknowledge what image is behind me. It's like a fire ritual I did for Imbolc. It's a Celtic holiday and at the midwinter. And I do think like another part of conversations I'm having with people like across race, ethnicity, culture is like, how are we reclaiming certain cultural practices that maybe the government, the nonprofits aren't going to support. And for me, this was like a way to, you know, this is about the goddess Bridget. I'm not going to go into this all right now, but just the idea that what she can do for me is like allow me to figure out what I need to burn away and what I need to shine a light on. And in suicidal moments, that's been really helpful. But I've really found like connecting with people about like what works for us uniquely, whether it's culturally or individually in these moments, that can't really be captured in sort of a crisis plan by a system, has also been really important. So making sure that in our organizing spaces and our mutual support spaces, like we have the chance to explore those things. And we're not just working on the timeline and the urgency of like a city government or even like a campaign, even though those aren't really important too. So that's also what I'm sitting with tonight.
Thank you. So much wisdom shared so far. Before we move to the next question, do other panelists want to share about strategies, practices, or just the way that you've navigated the world amidst all these challenging interventions and oppressive systems?
I think, and also, sorry, I forgot to give a visual description for myself. Luke again, I'm a Black man with a bald head and a gray jacket with a white shirt and a white background behind me. But I think one thing that often gets overlooked is just the power of education. And it's not just for the politicians or policymakers, but also for the public at large. I think oftentimes within these systems, a lot of the oppressive approaches are billed as safety or quality approaches to, you know, protect people or really help people and give quote unquote care. But I think often the public, especially in the media, don't really recognize what the system actually looks like on the inside. And so being able to tell your stories, as both Sean and Olka mentioned, and really dispel the myths about what is happening within the system, but also making people very aware of the horrors that are happening to people, so that, you know, most people at heart want to be compassionate, want to support people, and letting them know that this is not support, that this is truly oppression. You know, for instance, we held a press conference recently, and there was a news reporter who didn't recognize that things like electroshock therapy were still happening in hospitals. You know, that it was sort of seen as this old practice, but being able to say this is what actually happens in here, because most people don't get a chance to actually see what the inside looks like, really begins to dispel those myths that hold up the oppressive system.
I'll just briefly say that I think strategies, we need all the strategies we can get, right? And everything people have said, I think, is really very moving and very important. But what we're able to accomplish in these struggles evolves over time based on the political landscape that we're facing, right? So right now we're at a moment of intensifying state assault and fascist attack and really, really brutal, aggressive violence in the United States, that the task so much is figuring out how to push back on that, right? How to defend each other, to be in solidarity with each other in our survival. And there have been historical moments when rebellions have really been on the advance. And those have also been moments of struggles around deinstitutionalization, anti-psychiatry, building social links and solidarity between mad people, and really demanding and winning large-scale reforms about how mental health care is managed that, you know, run into limitations and pushback and backlash and all these things. But like, I think both the George Floyd rebellion and the uprisings in the 1970s have really been watershed moments for people being able to articulate something of experiences around madness and being able to clear political space in the midst of a much, much broader struggle to demand real changes. And so being attuned to these links between different kinds of movements that have been so important for us.
Thank you, Michelle and Luke. Yeah, really great segue to the next question. And just to kind of, you know, dovetail off that, just really appreciate the intentionality of being aware of the various like struggles and timely changes and just the state of where things are. And then, you know, Luke just speaking to the realities of the horrors that are persisting, and that, you know, for some people, the uprisings and the advancement I say, you know, just that those things are under siege, and for some people they are still too little too late. So, you know, for our next question, how are you all seeing today's socio-political conditions shape the push for expanded force and coercion of people experiencing mental health challenges? I put that in quotes. Who's most impacted? And then again, to like queerify, like Madden, the panel, why is everything on fire? Why is everything getting worse? And who's it getting worse for? And if systems are not going to have reform and our communities are under siege, what is that about too? Like, because it's not just the systems that are being carceral, it's also our communities becoming carceral and fragment and division in our own, amongst our own people, and even in mad communities. So, and, you know, Luke, go ahead. I see you come off mute.
Yeah, I think, especially when it comes to increases in forced treatment, I think the number one thing over the last 4 years has been this supposed increase in violence and the scapegoating of folks within the mental health and substance use communities as being the perpetrators of that violence. So a lot of what we have seen here in New York and also in states like California and others has been this call for more public safety or care through coercive measures. Another thing to really think about as well, which has been a huge push for it, has been the growing number of people experiencing homelessness. And these are challenges that really require a lot of time and specific policies to try to address. But what we see is a lot of politicians and policymakers looking for quick fixes, being able to tell the public that they are tough on crime or big on public safety, we're trying to tackle the homelessness challenges. And what we end up seeing is the recycling of a push for more institutionalization, partly because that has created this mix of violence, and the growing number of people who are experiencing homelessness has created a public fear that we are witnessing through media being pushed, but also the public accepting these strategies that are billed as care and compassionate, rather than understanding that this is another form of carceral settings. So we're seeing police be used to either sweep people off the street, pick them up and take them to hospitals or jails and prisons. And oftentimes, I mean, for the most part, the people who are most affected are Black and Brown communities, as well as communities in the LGBTQ community, as well as the general disability communities. So folks who otherwise have been really pushing for more community inclusion have been pushed further out of the community and pushed towards institutionalization because of fear, this scapegoating, and these sort of false calls for compassion through bills that are, at the end of the day, just another form of institutionalization and incarceration.
Couldn't agree more. Mic drop. Anyone else have things to add? I see Sean, you're nodding your head quite a bit.
I'll just say briefly that, we're really seeing such an escalating state federal assault and on many state and municipalities on poor people's lives, on the lives of people of color, on the lives of trans people, migrants. And the state assault, is building on the infrastructure that has been developed, right, by both parties, including by liberals for decades now, but being wielded and weaponized and escalated in new ways. And that I think it's sort of trying to think about that big picture can be really helpful for recognizing and trying to analyze particular policy changes. That there is a certain kind of analysis by a faction of the ruling class that like an old liberal reform democratic order is over, and that it's time to shore up and build a kind of violent barrack society, one really very explicitly organized around white male supremacy and xenophobia and nationalism and natalism. And that we're seeing that on a large scale in a kind of battle between very, very different visions and models of what kind of society that we're fighting for. And that this is both, I think, that they are recognizing that it's built on a level of crisis, right? It's there, and that this crisis opens up opportunities both for us to push back, but also for us to be able to begin to make connections, to not just go back to how things were a year ago, which was actually really quite horrible, but to really be pushing forward a different kind of progressive, intersectional, radical vision as a pushback against this fascist moment.
Yeah, I have endless thoughts about this, but I'll try to just be brief because there's a lot going on in the world, as y'all both just said. But I'll speak from Massachusetts perspective. We are one of the few states, maybe just a couple, that doesn't have this thing called, kind of gets euphemistically called assisted outpatient treatment, which is basically like extending the carceral state in different ways that I think New York has under, forget the name of it in New York, but just like a lot of states have this bigger apparatus for even when people are out of psychiatric incarceration, the state can basically follow them. It's like parole in my mind. And there is another possible bill that is being proposed in Massachusetts to actually enact that. And I feel like we're in a political time where that actually could pass, even though folks at Wildflower and a lot of groups throughout Massachusetts have pushed back against that. And I guess something else that we were on the cusp of starting in Northampton and even Somerville out in the Boston area is like actually getting overdose prevention sites where people who are drug users, specifically opiate users, would have a safer place to inject and use and wouldn't die. But I feel like the tide is turning in our state to more, police-based, as you said, Luke, and me too, like police-based ideas around safety, which doesn't keep a lot of us on this call safe. And so that's a big struggle right now. I do think, I will say, I feel really heartened by some of my underground communities that are just like showing up for each other. I was part of an organizing or a conference a couple weeks ago that didn't feel like a conference because we actually had herbalists there, we had healers, we had people talking about funding community care outside the state as well as like practitioners with doing immigrant defense work and peer respite work, all these different things. And, I feel really heartened by that and held by that. And so part of my body is like feeling like dread and panic right now about this conversation about like what's going on. But the other part is feeling like, folks in my queer and trans community and my Mad People's community and my abolitionist minded community are like showing up right now. And I really hope that's happening in other parts of the country too. And sometimes in Western Massachusetts, we're actually like, people are moving like queer and trans folk from other parts of the country to take refuge here. And it's kind of intense. But one thing I will say that's really amazing is that I want to give a shout out to Wildflower again, because just last Monday, they opened up a queer and trans peer respite in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is a small city, just south of where I live. And it just feels amazing that that's happening in this time and it's still being funded. And this is available for anyone in the state who identifies as LGBTQIA. And so I guess I just want to hold like some of the stuff that feels dreadful and some of the things that feel like people are showing up for even more strongly right now, even though a lot of us are tired. And so that's what's kind of circling my head and my heart right now.
All right, Luke again. I think Sean mentioned that New York has Kendra's Law, and I think that's a perfect example of the disproportionate effect on communities of color. Here in New York, upstate New York, 3 out of 5 Kendra's Law orders are on people of color, whereas in New York City, it's 4 out of 5, which is disproportionate to the percentage of folks that make up the actual population. And when you see the push to increase its use and to honestly lower the rights that people have and due process that people have that have been pushed by both the state and or the governor and the state here, we're really seeing that erosion of rights as a way to do this. And I think part of the big struggle is this backdrop that people having their rights and exercising their rights is contrary to public safety. That's really been the message that has been pushed through, that you can't both make the public more safe and also protect people's rights. And we know that that is absolutely not the case, but that has been a lot of the language that has been pushed forward. And I think part of the major challenge that we've had has been trying to dispel that for communities, and particularly when you think about the vast needs a lot of folks have. And a lot of these measures get pushed through because they're billed as sort of a way to support a loved one, the best way for a lot of folks who are really trying to just help their loved ones, but don't really see a way to do so. Because our system has been so broken to get any sort of access to services that are effective and helpful for individuals. You see, while we've come a long way with peer support, there's still nowhere near enough access for peer support or an understanding from the public about it. So when you have a broken system that doesn't support people well, it seems that the policymakers have less interest in fixing that system and supplementing where necessary, and rather trying to shift and push people back into the systems that have failed them countless times or traumatized them or physically harmed them. And the environment has really seemed as if instead of trying to make that change that is necessary, we all have been calling for, folks would rather just force people into those services, as if, you know, not wanting those types of broken services is a problem on the individual and not the system. And that's been a really tough thing to challenge and to change within the conversation.
I wanted to just kind of uplift. I think a lot of times I've like been experiencing more frustration lately because I think like I mean, we have to give space folks to like have their awakenings and, you know, get involved, and like everybody's on their own timeline. But I think it's really frustrating, like as an Indigenous person, where like it's always a new crisis, right? It's always like people are like, this is the worst it's ever been. And I'm like, please take a look around at literally any marginalized community and just have a meet, you know, like have a seat, have a moment, take a breath, because like Michelle was saying, like the entire structure has been here for a long time, long time, right? Like rounding people up, slave patrols, Indian agents, right? Like monitoring and surveilling people from like leaving their lands, right? They took us to boarding schools, right? They took us to church. They, you know, so I'm like, all of these things just look different, right? Like things change and obviously evolve over time. Um, and they've been honing their skills, right? Like colonizers are like doing what they do best, right? Like they're 100% on board with this, right? And so I think like whenever we're talking about like who is most impacted, I think, and maybe connecting back to our tiredness, right? Like, because we've been doing this, it hasn't just been since 2020 for us, right? Or it hasn't just been since dude took office again, right? Like, it's been however long we've been in movement spaces, however long we've been radicalized, right? You know, so I mean, I think it's important. Um, that's another way of like enforcing urgency culture and enforcing grind culture is to adopt the like colonizer memory. Like they want us to think this is a new problem. We've never been here before. We don't have the tools, right? But I think everyone on this panel represents a strong lineage of folks that have survived multiple movements, right? And have shown that we do have the strength and the skills and the collective power, and that's why they don't want us to gather in places like this, right? They don't want us to talk to one another. And I really love what Luke said about the rising tide lifts all boats, because there is so much fragmentation in our movements that they don't want us to have Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty and queer liberation and all of these things at once, and you know, mad survivorship and you know, listening to people. And so I really think that this is just a beautiful example of this is what it takes, right? Like, because we're not all on here panicking, right? We're like, we've been here, it's looked different, but I mean, fascism is like colonialism's little cousin, like, and they can all get the hands, you know? So, um, so I think it's important to keep that with us as well, to say that, sure, but also, right?
Thank you, Dr. Blackdeer. Yeah, everything you said. They want us to think this is new, and I think this really connects to, you know, our next question, like in this atmosphere of increased, you know, increased in different ways, but really the same in so many other ways too, surveillance and hostility towards Black, Indigenous, trans, disabled, and poor communities. How do we navigate the tension between visibility and safety? And I really appreciate all of the responses that have to do with more, you know, professionalized concepts around activism, movement, and forward momentum in decarcerating community and care. And I'm really interested in also hearing more about like the personal, like lived experiences you have about how you navigate the tension, especially if your job role has things to do with things like visibility and safety, because I hear so much in my community, like even surveillance and security culture, and how that can be both like helpful, healing for some, and detrimental when like we need to, like you said, we need to see each other, we need to talk to each other. So yeah, Olka, would you mind getting us started?
Yes, I love this question so much. Thank you for this question. I have so many thoughts on this. And I think that it boils down to navigating visibility and safety in this, especially in this moment, is something that should be done both strategically and intentionally. That visibility or even invisibility and its implications for safety should be something that is considered in our strategies and not just like taken for granted or doing things the way we've been doing them. Because of course, on one hand, many of our communities are always navigating the tension of sometimes hypervisibility or not being seen at all, and what those things mean for our safety. And, I tend to think that in recent history that many of our movements have overbalanced towards visibility because of how much we have experienced being invisibilized as human beings. For me, as a Black person, that looks like a lot of the like representation matters rhetoric, where you get the murals, the Black Lives Matter paintings everywhere, that you get your first potential Black and Tamil woman who's going to be president, but they're a proponent for genocide, where the representatives of the US at the United Nations who are voting against ceasefire are Black people, right? This devastation of visibility, honestly. And that can mean that you only get performative changes with no meaningful structural differences, because white supremacy and colonialism are like changing beasts to the conditions that, we are even setting forth. So, being super visible or being visible can mean something extremely empowering for many people. It can mean that you are deciding and working to be seen, because your experience, there's been this attempt to disappear your experience. And, right, it also means that you can be a much easier target, because you are seen, because you are noticed and known, and your name and your face is out there. On the other hand, that can mean you're maybe a little bit harder to disappear because people gonna notice if you're gone. On the other hand, right, I really think of invisibility as a superpower, because, it is. When we talk about the superpowers, invisibility is one. And so I like to remind people of that, maybe to some it might mean that you don't reach everyone, right? That's the thing of being invisible. And maybe that also means that you're easier to erase, right? Because there is so much of that, at least I can think of so much of that in queerness and Black movements, right? That people's contributions to justice and liberation is erased, as well as their names and faces and how we know them. And I think of, the Underground Railroad, and being seen by who you choose to be seen by and not by everybody. I think that white supremacy loves legacy. It loves existing forever. It loves being known. I'm a person who's like, forget me. If the work I do stands, I don't care if you knew who I was or what I looked like, right? I joke, like, you could Hidden Figures me all day. Some of my favorite people who've ever done this work are Hidden Figures. I am a huge nerd for the Montgomery bus boycott. And whenever I can, I uplift the names of Joanne Robinson and Mary Fairbanks, who Mary Fairbanks started the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, Alabama. Joanne Robinson was the president of the Women's Political Council as they organized the Montgomery bus boycotts. And we do not know these names intentionally and strategically, because they chose to elevate people like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., whose names that we know. One of the reasons for the choosing of Rosa Parks to be visible was a strategic decision, because she was named, she was beyond reproach, that she was a leader and elder in the church, that she was in the NAACP, that she was like you couldn't find a thing on her, right? And that she was chosen, that when that moment happened, there was already a building of a movement that was already happening, that the demands had already been being made, the strategy was already being put out, and that in this moment where people were already organized and ready, that Rosa Parks, when she was arrested, they said, aha, hit go. Highly recommend the book, The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Started It. That is Joanne Robinson's biography, where there's so many lessons to be gleaned from that. But, you know, I think that visibility and safety, especially in this moment, is something that people should think very seriously about, right? I think that, and I'm saying this as a person who's been a communications professional, whose like whole job for a long time has been visibilizing and storytelling and getting stuff in people's faces. And, you know, we can see the impact of that, and we can see the backlash of that, even in recent history from the Black Lives Matter movement. And so to navigate visibility and one's safety with intention and strategy, and I think to consider the superpower of invisibility and what it means to move in a way where your roadmaps are inside of quilt patterns or stories, and they're not seen, and therefore, you know, they can get underneath, you know, beside, to the side of, like, oh, they go like this with their neck, but they can't quite see you, and how effective we can be in those ways as well.
Well, those are such beautiful and I think really helpful comments. That the complexity of visibility and not just valorizing it. I want to say a little bit about that, thinking about trans politics over the last decade. So we, you know, there was this big trans tipping point in the early 2000s when like trans people and Laverne Cox and lots of, you know, were on the cover of magazines. And you know, it was a powerful moment for some people in a lot of ways. I think a lot of kids came out as trans after that on some level. And that there's some relationship between that and just the brutal attacks on trans people happening right now, right? And Miss Major, an incredible Black trans leader and militant and revolutionary long term, says that that we showed our enemies where we were, right? We revealed where we were on some level, and that there's some way that visibility can be so dangerous in exactly the levels that you're talking about, Olka, and that we're seeing right now. And I think particularly we need to really critique and reject this liberal idea that visibility by itself leads to any kind of substantive progressive change. That there's this liberal idea that if you get on magazine covers, if you get the big interviews, if you get lots of attention, obviously that's going to translate into our lives being better. When actually the questions are like, how is this visibility as a part of a strategy helping us get the means of defending ourselves, getting the means of being able to reproduce ourselves and care for our communities, actually building the alliances that are going to be politically advanced, fundamental civil rights, trans liberation, solidarity, fighting back against a kind of violent carceral state and poverty. And that sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And we have to analyze that strategically. And, you know, I know a lot of trans people sort of going underground right now and really trying to be stealth, taking themselves offline. I think that makes a lot of sense strategically. Just want to close by saying in part why I'm not doing that, that I think when trans stuff is particular as an issue in that there's so many people out there who have trans desires, who know something trans about themselves, who like they need to come into contact with some kind of community, some kind of sense that it's possible in order to be able to find their own path of transitioning. And that can happen in really underground communities, right? There's like a big trans women underground punk scene in New York right now. There's lots of like trans IDF raves, and like that's not visible at all, but they're finding each other. It can also happen in really visible ways where, you know, a kid goes on the internet and like sees some trans celebrity and is like, oh my God, that could be me. And like, I imagine like a lot of people here have gotten a lot of death threats and a lot of harassment and a lot of really vicious right-wing assault on like me and my family and my life. And I've chosen to stay out and to stay really clear about me as a trans person publicly, in part because I really want to help foster the space for everyone to be able to find their own path, to finding a gender that really works for them. And whether they do that underground, whether they do that in their communities that they're already in, whether they do that publicly, that's their own choice. But like by being public, and you know, Miss Major said this, but she's a highly public figure as well, you know, it's about helping to create the space where we can recognize and care for each other. So that it's a tension, right? That we have to navigate dialectically and navigate strategically, I think, in ways that you spoke really well to, Olka.
Thank you, Michelle. Again, just like a really beautiful river into the next question. And I really resonate with what you said, especially as a Black, trans, non-binary person who also is mad, you know, what is safety and then what is self-protection, and like when can I just simply not afford to protect myself because I just don't have the luxury of being sane in public, frankly, or like people are going to see me whether or not I want them to see me, and if people can't see me, they can't find me, and they don't, and when we're being erased, you know, I'm thinking of my Igbo ancestry, when living under like just fascist rule and continuous war, and people, and cultural genocide and the erasure of history, how it's a tool of the oppressor, like we said, to preserve legacy and establish history, and also how some of us are fighting to just establish existence and the right to live, and we have to see each other. And I feel that especially with the co-optation of the MAD movement, the overuse of stylized, personality-driven activism that's so based on personal branding and social media commodification and $1,000 workshops that have sliding scale fees, and you have your own LLC, but that's a different panel, and I would love to do a panel on that someday. And so, yeah, let's talk about how we care for each other in social movements in ways that go beyond the nuclear family and state. You know, I'm thinking of like mad people that have flown me out to do like grief and like plant medicine rituals, people that have come into my home and just like cleaned out my fridge when it's full of like rotting food, like people that call me when I don't answer the phone, people that see me when I can't see myself. I would love to hear like what tensions all of you are navigating when operating the state-sanctioned systems like mental health institutions or academia. How are you doing that together? And Michelle, you can start us off again.
Yeah, I don't have as much to say about the state-sanctioned systems. I'll think a little bit and let other people answer this. I want to speak a little bit to sort of being out, like what it means to support each other outside of that. Just slightly different, I think, than the way you phrased it. Yeah.
I agree. I think the second part of the question is really tricky. The first portion says, you know, how do we care for another in ways that go beyond the nuclear family and state? Sorry if I added so much there, so much to think about.
No, your comments are wonderful. So I'll speak to that bit a little bit. It's part of why, so like, I'm a mental health provider, I'm an organizer, I've been in like abolitionist spaces for 25 years now in different ways. And so there are a lot of different ways that I think about this panel. But what I was really excited to sort of think about here and think about decarcerating care is some of my research into what I call insurgent social reproduction. So like social reproduction is this academic Marxist feminist idea that there's all this work that we do for care for each other, to care for children, to care for old people, to care for our bodies, that like gets us to work or keeps us alive. And that there are all these strategies of like underground social reproduction that people do when they can't count on the state, when they can't count on their families, and when they can't count on jobs, right? Which is a lot of people in our lives, a lot of people on this call, a lot of people that we love and care about. And that, you know, in these underground worlds, people build strategies of mutual aid and survival with each other. And something that I became really interested in, and I was talking about this at the beginning, are these moments of rebellion where these underground strategies of care start becoming central to keeping the movement going, right? So thinking about protest camps, thinking about blockades, thinking about protracted rioting, thinking about civil wars. I opened my book talking about the Oaxaca commune, indigenous women in 2006, during an 8-month occupation in Oaxaca, Mexico, and cooking and caring for their children on the barricade, right? Thinking a lot about STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera in New York in the early 70s, in the middle of this huge rebellion that they were a part of, building a house that supported young trans people using the money they made from sex work, and through that joined in all these other social movements that were happening, marching alongside the Young Lords, marching for trans and queer liberation, marching against the war. And that these, strategies of care are both like so much of how we think about these issues gets really tied up with public policy. And that's really important for fighting back against like some of the horrible policies that Luke is talking about, right? That hurt us so much. And part of that fight back is looking at the strategies of how do people care for each other now, and then at moments of real political volatility and political potential, how do those modes of care become strategies of building movement on a big scale? And that's a lot of what my writing has been about the last few years. And I think it sort of links these different levels of, there's a public policy dimension, but then mutual aid, and then as a strategy of survival, and then beginning to look at how that unfolds during big movement moments. And thinking about all these things together. So thank you, I appreciate it.
I too want to speak a little bit to the first part of this question around building care for each other in social movements. Another one I could go off about, but so I will name that, I have been kind of like professionalized advocacy for maybe like 15 years now. I started off volunteering at my local recycling center and then working with the family of Tyrone West, who was murdered by Baltimore police in 2013, and like doing the hitting the streets thing and the, organizing thing. And I ended up a farmer, and that makes so much sense to me. Right. One of the lineages that I didn't name at the beginning, but want to name now, is I work in the lineage of my elder and mentor who's now passed away, Kifu Farouk, and she talks about a land-based strategy for liberation. And so for me, something that feels very important when we talk about building care for each other is the tangibility, is attending to people's basic needs like food and medicine and housing. When I first left the US in recent history, I went to Trinidad and Tobago where I was farming and learned a lot of my farming knowledge. And what I recognized when I was there, because I had actually just come from Oakland, California, where people got all of the words and the transformative justice this and the abolition that. And when I was in Trinidad and Tobago, not a single person used any of those words. Nobody said the word community one time. And yet that was what was happening everywhere. Disability justice was happening everywhere. All these things that we are always talking about was just happening in a tangible reality. And it changed me, right? I came home and I was like, stop talking about things. Like, I know it's kind of funny because we're on a panel right now, but I'm like, what you doing? Because the talking sometimes be this much and the doing be this much. And so for me, care is really about something that people can touch, taste, and feel, right? Even if that is like a metaphysical touch, that is a metaphysical tangibility. So yeah, right. For me, like I started out growing tomatoes on my apartment steps, right? Like I don't want to hear about I ain't got land, so I can't grow nothing. I ain't have land for the longest and I still grew stuff, right? Or skilling up. Like I'm a beekeeper now and I learned how to beekeep on YouTube. So if we all got internet connection right here, we could watch some YouTube video. YouTube University does a lot, right? How are we skilling up and inviting people into that skilling up with us? And so that's one thing that I really want to name about caring for people, right? To go beyond the talking, the conceptualizing. The other thing that I want to talk about that I feel so strongly about is for individuals to tend to their wounds, right? Like political organizing is not a substitute for personal work. And there are far too many people in our movements who are making that mistake. And I know and have experienced that we have movement leaders who are irresponsible with the human beings that they're meant to serve. As you all were just talking about, right, the branding of activism, that there are people who are in these movements operating from ego and narcissism, who have carved out niches of social capital and financial power through organizing brands. But if you ask the streets and the people who they work with, that interpersonal is off. And so that is something that I really want to always name in this care for ourselves in these social movements, because people will be quick to quote George Jackson and say, settle your quarrels, fascism is here, and not quick to evaluate why people do not trust you so much that they would rather just go and face the fascism than come and do stuff with you, right? Because there's a reason. And so that is something that I really, really want to name in these social movements generally, is like, if you are not treating people right, who are right next to you, who are underneath you, who you're hiring, who you're paying, who you're the one who gets all the grants and you're the one re-granting to other people, that you must be called to account to true and deep care, which starts with the interpersonal, which starts with the personal. All right, I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna go off.
I think I really quickly wanted to just say, I think some of the, when I think about peer support, peer support really came out of mutual support because there was no real system that provided that same level of support for folks who were psych survivors, for folks who were dealing with mental health issues and didn't have the right sort of place to go. And I think to answer the tension that within the state operated systems and state sanctioned systems is we've seen a professionalization of peer support. And with that professionalization, sort of the loss of that mutual aid roots that really came about from it. And I think there is also this huge push towards utilizing peers and peer supporters to continue pushing the oppressive system because they're stuck in that system, and we all need to get paid. We all need to eat in some way, some fashion. But I think, when we talk about peer support in particular, that really came about communities trying to help each other, because you didn't have that family. You didn't have, the clinical provider that could do the same thing, but that really just friend to friend, person to person sort of connection that was critical there. And I think that sort of connection is still critical, especially in trying times like this. Sometimes it's just good to commiserate with someone a little bit so that you know that you're not alone in thinking that the world is actually on fire right now. What is going on? And it doesn't feel like you are losing it because everybody else seems to be fine with it. And I think that's incredibly helpful. But it also gives you a platform to spring from. And I think someone else mentioned before, a safe place to go afterwards, because, some of us, by nature of what we're doing, have to put ourselves out there and know that there will be backlash. But having that group that you can go back to and say, look, this is what happened to me. And also understanding, a group of people who can say, I can do this, I can do that. I can be that front face because I'm able to, I have that protection right now, but also knowing that other people want to do that kind of work, but might not be able to be out front because maybe they work for the state system and they're trying to change it. But also, making sure that someone is saying that, but giving that sort of support back and forth. And I think we have to make sure that we support our folks who are experiencing that tension so that they have that safe place to be and, you know, that understanding that's there. And I will stop there.
Thank you again. Just so many parallels to the next question. And, you know, for this one, I want to hear from Dr. Blackdeer, who we haven't heard your voice in just a minute. What do decolonial approaches to mental health care, whatever we're calling mental health, I don't know what that word, look like, and how do they fundamentally unsettle or reject logics of pathology and control that underpin mainstream mental health systems? And again, I notice on the panel, I know we're expected to keep up with this like linearity and time. Please give yourself as much time as you need to answer this question, and we can adjust the flow as needed, because I want to give you space for this one.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really think what a lot of folks have been sharing on is really like the word that keeps coming to mind for me is the relationality. And I think that's like a really big, you know, if you're not familiar with what decolonial is, it's just anti-colonialism, right? And so everything that is a part of these spaces and structures, like I always say, bureaucracy is a really poor substitute for community. And I think a lot of times what people want is community, but there isn't that relationality. There is no, like, people have no idea how to even be in a space together. Like I'm co-facilitating a class right now, and we just got our feedback back, and some of it, like, they're like, why are the professors always talking to one another? Like, why are they going off on soapboxes? And I'm like, this is our lived experience as queer women of color, but like, I'm sorry it's not a PowerPoint, right? Like, I'm sorry I'm not teaching liberation from a PowerPoint, you know? Like, and I think that so much of what we're expected to talk about with like decolonizing mental health, it's like, this is how we decolonize, 1, 2, 3, right? And we're supposed to make it this nice, palatable thing. And then everyone just like co-ops the language, and then that's how we get all these, you know, wolves in sheep's clothing. Or I don't even want to say that they're wolves, because I'm like, y'all would have to get some skills to be a wolf, but like, y'all are in the space causing problems to the space, you know? Like, so I always think too, like, I'm not like a TikToker or whatever, but like if I had to make a TikTok, I would be like, POV, like the worst person you know just learned social justice language. And it would be like all of those like never ending lists of like, I know there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, but I just need to share. And I'm like, okay, like we get it. We got it. I understand, right? So for me, I think it's really just being in community, right? Like even like my intro to the question just now, I'm sure a lot of people will be like, shut up and answer the question, right? Like, because we're taught and trained to like give a linear answer and, you know, make a bullet point list and like be efficient with your time, right? And I think like so much of this is really that ingrained white supremacy culture. Like if you're sitting and speaking with elders, right? Like even the way that they tell you a story is part of the lesson, right? Like it's inviting you to slow down, to sit down and listen, right? And not just, okay, yeah, can you hurry up and like transmit generational wisdom, right? Like we would never say that. And so I think whenever we're talking about like, what does mental health look like? What can we look like for actual care? It's, we can't even do that in these structures. Like these structures are made for us to like strip us providers, researchers, people meaning to accept the care, right? It's designed to separate us all from our humanity, right? There is no relationality that can happen in these spaces truly without like you being in trouble for something, right? This is why I probably did not go the clinician route, because I knew I would probably always get in trouble for something, right? Not that I don't get in trouble enough already in friggin' academia, but I think, yeah, I think that's where I'm always kind of hitting my head on the ceiling or the wall or whatever structure that someone has put in my way, is that they really want us to sort people into boxes and then ourselves fit into boxes. And we are not meant to be in boxes, right? And I think a lot of what people have been doing here lately is like, well, what if we had, you know, more gentle boxes? Or what if we had slightly larger boxes? And I'm like, I don't want to be in a box at all. Like, my spirit was not meant to like be within, like, understood within these 4 little lines, right? And so, I mean, tangible examples of like decolonial mental health, like there are people that have done work with like working with structures, because again, the worst person you know learns social justice language, or like silence is complicity, or like working in a system, you're complicit, right? And I'm like, do you know what complicit means? Like, but sure, I understand. Some people are like, we can never change system from within. But I'm like, well, okay, well, just stand outside and yell at them and let me know how that goes for you. But like there's a hospital in Seattle, and they see a lot of Alaska Native clients because that's like the closest hospital to a lot of folks in Alaska, in rural Alaska. And whenever they wanted to pray over relatives before a surgery or an operation or whatever, they wanted to be able to smudge or to light, sage or cedar tobacco, right? And the hospital's like, you can't have a fire in a hospital, right? And we're like, it's not a fire, like it's not a fire, but whatever. So they worked with the board and eventually got like a smudging policy passed so that folks could be able to pray and be with their relatives in that way. For me, I would never put the word smudging and policy together. Like that would never occur to me, right? But that's what decolonizing looked like for them, right? And it's not up to me to say you're complicit because you've got a smudging policy, right? Like, because I'm like, as long as folks are able to get their needs met and that helps them, great. There was another example of like, there was a carceral system, right? A carceral mental health, like, I think it was a substance use, and it was attached to like a wing of a hospital, and you're not allowed to leave, right? You can't just like leave and then come back. But there were a lot of Indigenous men that were missing ceremony, going to sweat lodges, because there's obviously no way for them to leave treatment, go to their home, right? And then return, because they would be seen as like, you're leaving the treatment, you can't come back. So what they did is they worked with the tribe. They contracted, they had elders consult, and they actually were able to build a sweat lodge on site at the substance use facility. So it was kind of like they could still have treatment fidelity, right? Which is what funders want, but they could also have that really necessary kind of cultural connection. But it's also, I mean, that's physical too, right? Like you're literally physically sweating, you're connecting to your culture, you're honoring your ancestors. I think some people would consider that spiritual, right? Whatever that language is for you and however that fits. But I think like fundamentally rejecting pathology is relationality, right? Like I can't write down for you how to be a person in community. And I think there are a lot of people that have no idea what that looks like, or even how to talk to people. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I cannot tell you how to do that. You just have to do it. And like, yeah, you'll fuck up. We all fuck up, right? Like I'm gonna say something wrong. I'm from Arkansas. Like I'm probably gonna pronounce your name with the weirdest Southern twang that doesn't make any sense, right? But we'll get past it, right? You'll say that's not how it works. And I'll say, okay, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do to repair, right? It's not about like, and again, that white supremacy culture of perfection, right? Like folks are just they just want to have the right language, right? To then weaponize and make a TikTok and feel great about. So I'm going to digress now, but thanks so much, Nze, for this space. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for everything. I'm just really sitting with how it, connects to the next question, which is like a real, offering examples. Like we talk about strategy and there's all this language, and like you said, everything is a PowerPoint and like everything is a panel, or like, everything is some shiny stage moment, but like, what do real grassroots non-carceral approaches actually look like? What do they feel like? What approaches have you been a part of or are you familiar with? And I, want to give space to folks that have varying opinions and perspectives about what it means to be non-carceral or anti-carceral. Speaking for myself, I don't think it's possible to be non-carceral in a carceral system. And I understand that the reality is, my people are still like living, breathing, eating, sleeping, and dying in institutions. So, while there's value in drawing from non-carceral work for inspiration, I understand the sentiment of we can't sit out and shout out at the systems, but for some of us, there's also no standing or yelling, just like divesting, walking away, and deliberately building outside of those systems and protesting their usage and going to systems only for what we want and need and nothing more. So just want to ask folks, again, like what grassroots non-carceral approaches are you part of? Are you familiar with? How do you understand non-carceral support? What does it mean? And what are you actually a part of right now? What are they offering to you? And Sean, I'll let you start here.
Thanks, Say. I'm going to pull up on my lineage of Irishness and start with a little ramble, because that's part of my people too, where we kind of go around the point. But I'm going to get to the answer to this question, but I've been talking about the movie Sinners with people so much the last several days. And I know like Olka, you're from Mississippi, so I know like you probably know that space better than I, but like I, as an Irish person, been talking with my Black folks and my white folks about like what this movie is bringing up. And it's drawn a lot of, I guess like I've been thinking about the power of music as a way to bring in culture of different ways into spaces. And I don't know about other people on this panel, but sometimes I try to be open to what's flowing through me as opposed to like owning it. And so I had some words come to me in a song, and this is related to some other questions too, that I was thinking about how like the government is just erasing the record of queer folks and BIPOC folks right now, like in the the histories. And so in some ways, like a lot of us are being cut off from these like, grand narratives, which a lot of us know isn't the real history anyway, but they're just like things being erased. And so I was thinking about like, what do we do from the shadows? Like we can connect differently. We can connect these intersections. And I guess like, and some things that I'm doing around community safety with my community, I'm not going to speak out loud because it's meant to be secret. And I just want to name that to you, that like we're being live cast. And I think even though this panel has some incredible possible stories we could emerge, like this doesn't even feel like the safest space to surface some of these stories too about how we're keeping each other safe. But one thing I wanted to say with that in mind is that I found like the intersections and the shadows, like not the spotlit spaces, but the spaces where we're like kind of what you were saying, Dr. Black Deer Autumn, like spaces to like fuck up and figure it out together, as really powerful. And I'm thinking about one moment in particular when I've tried to go out of my comfort zone, which I think is also what can happen when governments co-opt our shit is, and sorry, I'm cursing, I hope that's okay. I'm just in a cussing space. That sometimes like when we get funded, it gets funded to cut ourselves off from each other too. So like peer support gets separated from harm reduction, it gets separated from, other sorts of work that could be called restorative justice, whatever. And so I remember a moment where like my lineage is largely about peer support. A friend who was doing a lot of drug user based work, we had been talking about how self-injury plays into harm reduction. And one time she texted me and said like, I had this moment where a person that's a drug user was also doing self-injury, and I went through this like clinical framework around that, and I was like, what am I doing? Because this is our time to really engage and meet someone where they're at and not sort of like judge and safety plan. And so we had this interesting moment where like we were just talking about moments where like out of fear we went back to what was maybe safer but not helpful in the moment. And that was just like one moment of a lot where I feel like just trying to connect beyond our movements and interpersonally like is allowing us to like maybe grow, or allowing me to grow. And yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about the way that how we can like fortify ourselves, connect, and maybe find community in the shadows. I'm someone who's also a Scorpio moon, so I think a lot about astrology wise, like that I need this like I need this space to kind of like rest and decompose, you know, kind of like metaphorically to like be able to create again. And so I think there's another angle on this for me too, where a lot of what has gotten valorized and like organizing and movement spaces in my mind is like the extroverted work, the frontline work. And I've been a person that's done that. And at times maybe have taken space that I shouldn't have and learned about that, right? But also like that cut me off from community too. It didn't allow me to figure out like how to slow down. And so I think um, the idea is like how do we find each other in the shadows is like what I've been thinking about a lot. And sometimes it's like, how do we make space for people to like channel stuff from the other world? And I guess this isn't about policy. I'm not in my policy head today, but just the other thing that feels important for me is like I follow the wheel of the year to like survive times that are difficult. And like this is like May Day time when there's rise up, but it's also Beltane in Celtic tradition, which says that this is the space between this world and the other world is the most thin, like similar to like Halloween or Samhain time. And the last thing I want to say, and then I'll cut it off, is I've been doing this ritual with some friends who might be on this webinar. So hello, if you're here, where we've been doing like a grief tending at the cemetery of the Northampton State Hospital, which is actually a dog park now. So it's like a dog park, but it's a cemetery. And a lot of people don't know it's a cemetery. And we're trying to draw attention to it, not in a public way, but just in like a private way. And it's been so healing to like enter a grief space together and acknowledge all the stuff that we're also experiencing. And so I think sometimes caring is like inviting each other to get vulnerable in these ways that might go beyond the mortal space we're in, like to say like, oh, I'm actually a channel of other things like song, or I'm a channel of ancestors. And sometimes it's taken marking space for grief to really like get to that vulnerable space. And so we just did this yesterday and it's really sitting with me today. And so I just want to honor that. Sometimes it's like, I think that actually fortifies me to be a fighter too, right? To be like, when I have this vulnerable space, like I have more discernment in my heart to know when to take action and like hopefully when to listen to. So at that, I'll be quiet, but I just wanted to share that with y'all.
Taking a breath because I'm like, we're all tired, but then it's amazing how just the energy starts to really build and swell. You know, I'm just noticing so much going on in the chat, and I saw Olka a comment about time, where you're at. Do you want to add anything before we move to the last question and close out?
No, I got something for the last question.
Perfect. Then, in such a rapidly shifting political landscape, how do you stay grounded in a long-term vision? Are there practices, personal or collective, that help sustain your commitment?
Yes. Okay. I will start us off and just want to name my big gratitude for all of y'all, for every single person who's here, and the folks who've been on the panel, and Nze for your moderation. I will say that staying grounded in a long-term vision, I don't. I am like one of the most optimistic people you will ever meet. And I am like, I'm so excited that we're all food for the mushrooms. I'm so excited that humans can't actually kill the earth and she gonna freeze all this over and start over if she needs to. Like, I am so excited when chaos and decay comes and then you witness how nature retakes. I'm excited because there are species who were meant to no longer exist who are now coming back into existence. So, my orientation towards my death work is something that is very grounding for me. It is something that for me, I am like, yes, I believe in a vision of justice. I believe in a vision of freedom, of liberation. I know it is true, possible, and that it will happen because I can imagine it, speak it, and so have my ancestors. And I see the evidence of the movement of the lineages that we are part of. I see the evidence because I'm alive today. And so I'm like, I know it'll happen. And I am absolutely not attached to that outcome. I know that all the white supremacists who I want to die are gonna die. That's very exciting. Also, me too, like, sorry, that's very exciting. I really focus on the here and now and the reduction of suffering wherever we can. And not necessarily, again, like I was saying, like for me, the longevity, the forever from now, right? I'm like far more detached to as a human being. I'm like, the dinosaurs were so cool. Dinosaurs were so cool. They're chickens now. It's like a little lizard. What gives me the right to think that I'm so worthy of existing forever, that my vision of humanity for Earth is the thing that's gonna go, so personally, I'm not grounded in a long-term vision. I'm grounded in a vision right now of shifting the conditions materially for the people who exist in the time and space that I exist in. And whatever happens after, if I reincarnate, it'll be my business then. And, for now, I know the work that I do will contribute to that vision if it does come to manifest. Thanks.
I'll just really briefly say that a project that's been really helpful to me is inviting people to write stories articulating the world that they want to live in. That, I co-authored a science fiction novel, Everything for Everyone, about a post-revolutionary society. And my co-author, Man Abdelhadi, and I have been inviting people to write stories articulating their own revolutionary visions, their own ideas, that extrapolating not as a blueprint, but as an articulation of the desire that we express in our movements and in our work right now. And articulating that out loud, saying that, naming that, and fleshing that out a little bit, right? Fleshing that out into a world with texture and feel and depth. And that's been really joyous and very helpful for me.
I think for myself, I would say two major things. The first and probably most important is really just getting back to people, getting back to the ground level of why I'm doing what I do. I think I often get very much stuck in the almost sort of policy wonk kind of world where it's just talking about policies, talking about numbers, and people are often seen in policy spaces as numbers rather than people with lives and families and loved ones. And getting back to sitting with people and realizing, okay, this is what people want out of their lives, similar to what Emmy was saying before about what your ideal life would be like. And thinking about the harms that have happened to people is that sort of driving factor. That I had a mentor who once said, any good advocate is angry, but just channels that anger in a way that is effective. And I think if you lose that anger, that's when you recognize that the oppression has really gotten to you. Because someone else recently said that disinterest is one of the number one tools of the oppressor. For you to say that I don't care about this anymore, it doesn't affect me anymore, I think that's a major struggle that we often get into, especially in times like this when you're inundated with bad things, that it's almost hard to focus on one thing or to focus on all of it, and it just feels demoralizing, but also really just freezes you in that moment. And then I think the second thing is, I grew up in Georgia, very Southwest Georgia, and the lineage of the civil rights movement, remembering that they took way more losses than they did wins for quite some time, and reminding yourself that there will be a lot of losses along the way, but making sure that thinking back to the people, that we need wins and we need people to continue pushing us forward until we get those wins, and continue piling up wins, and recognize that one win doesn't mean that things are solved, but rather that he might have made things a little bit better for some people, but you have to continue to keep going and really continue pushing yourself. And the movement, anyone else who is willing to join up to do it, but remembering that, you know, losing sometimes is part of this game, but you have to continue pushing through to get to the place where you win, because, you know, oppressors very much are on the side of power, which means that you have to claw that power back little by little, hopefully large chunks at a time, but when you don't get that, you have to continue pushing forward.
Thank you. Yeah, as we kind of close out, just want to circle back to, you know, the grief and tiredness we came into the space earlier today, because, you know, I hear that we have to keep going, and want to just say, like, some of our people aren't going anymore, and some of our people are stopping going. And, you know, I was just doom scrolling Instagram and saw this like Hope Core meme that was like, they say you only live once, and thank God, because I cannot do this again. And I was just really resonating with what Olka was saying, and what Sean was saying, and what Dr. Blackdeer was saying, especially about, you know, funding. And, you know, when we're talking about decarcerating care, we need to survive. And what does it mean to be a care worker? Like, what does it mean to make profit based on a social and civil rights movement, and be positioned to speak and benefit, like, socially and financially, from things like psychiatric survivors, like ancestors, generations of those who have passed on and been disappeared by systems and state-sanctioned violence, some of which we work in and work alongside. So, like, there's that complicity and humility we have to also adopt. And, you know, I just really am feeling what Olka was saying early. I hear this, like, holding things loosely, this, like, emergent, iterative understanding, like more of an ecological model of how change, transformation, and even death processes are a part of this. And as systems are dying and crumbling and we're grieving them, you know, we're also, like, living into this vision, and the dream of our ancestors is being brought into form. Like, I'm proof of that. My life is proof of that now. And, you know, it's just like this grief mantra, what I say to keep myself sane, not that that's a goal. The worst has already happened. It's happening right now. I'm experiencing it right now. And so sometimes it can only get better, and sometimes it just doesn't have to. And I really want to, like, avoid leaving off on a high note, because for some people there's not a high note. Like, things are hard. This panel is meant to really challenge and push us into action, and want to leave space for those that just feel like they can't go on any longer. And sometimes we need to just lay down and let the wave overtake us. And that's when we come and gather each other. And, you know, I really think on this panel, like, we're decarcerating the panel and just how we've spoken to each other. We've seen each other, we've heard each other, we've interacted directly, we've shared things. We don't always agree. We don't always see things or use the same language. And that is so beautiful. That feels like maddening. A panel to me is like just this really, like, divergent space. And I think that's part of what, like, decarcerating care, decarcerating relationships, and, like, community ways of being is, like, we're decarcerating ourselves, and we're decarcerating a social movement based on profit, hypervisibility, self and communal exploitation. And we're leaving space for things like death and loss and pain and tiredness, because that is real. And as, like, a Nigerian American person, like, as a person from Igbo lineage, my people are not allowed to rest. Like, we were just freed from British colonization in 1961. I very much still feel that pain. And I think, you know, while I want to acknowledge the wins and progress we've made, for some of us, it's just never enough. It will never be enough. And some things can't be restored because they were taken before we had an opportunity to even come into them. So I just really, again, want to thank all the panelists here today for just having such a robust conversation, sharing all your different views and perspectives, and really holding the tension of trying to decarcerate care ourselves and our communities, and find out what an emergent vision is, and hold space for there not having to be a vision. Because sometimes, you know, I think there's a quote, there is there's consequence when we bring things into form, whether that's worship of the written word or documenting or paying for things. So I just appreciate this formless, kind of fluid, really amazing panel. And thank you, IDHA, for creating the space and allowing us to bring just like a broader vision to decarcerating care in the 9th version. And with that being said, I will pass it off to Noah for announcements.
Thank you, Nze. So I'm just gonna do a few announcements before we close tonight. I have some exciting ones, but first I want to do a big shout out to, first of all, Nze for moderating. That was absolutely beautiful. And to all of our panelists. I'm definitely leaning into this feeling of tiredness that I have tonight, and I feel like that was overall a theme. But somehow through that tiredness, I think there's a big sense of clarity, of just groundedness, of truth telling. And I really felt that from all of the panelists and moderator. So thank you. Also want to say thank you to our tech team, to our access team, to everyone who helped shape this event, and for you all for being here and engaging with this event. And just your presence was really appreciated. So thank you for being here. Just to share what's happening next, you're going to get a follow-up email. We would love to have you share your feedback about how you experienced this event. So we invite you to share that. There's a link in the chat, and also in the follow-up email, you'll get a panel recording, the transcript. You'll also get the feedback form. You'll get some resources. Yeah, so you'll get a bunch of things in the follow-up email as well. And I want to be the first to share about our new series called Tending the Future of Care, Practices and Possibilities for Transformative Mental Health. This is our virtual training series for this year that I'm super excited to announce. And this is really building on a lot of the conversations that were spoken on tonight, of really looking at, the fact that we're on this sort of edge of collapse and polycrisis, and really needing tools to reshape and reimagine mental health care and what that looks like. So really providing tangible support and tools for people who are working in the system, who are looking for alternatives, for other approaches, bringing in a whole host of different knowledges meant to replenish and reconnect and remember ways of providing care that are not only possible, but already happening, already in motion. So super excited to share this with y'all. And here are our classes. We have a whole amazing list of faculty that are joining us for this. So yeah, this is the first class is in June, all through till September. We have 5 classes, and yeah, very excited for y'all to join us and continue on this kind of content that was discussed tonight. Yeah, I will just say with the series that you can find the link in the chat, and this is a first announcement. So once the registration is open, you'll be first to hear of it if you sign up to the mailing list and get that information. And so the other thing I want to share is that we also have a core curriculum out, the Transformative Mental Health core curriculum. And this is a foundational training for IDHA to thinking a lot about themes that were discussed tonight around transforming mental health. And so this curriculum is self-paced. You can take it at your own pace, or you can join in a cohort. There's many different ways to interact with the curriculum. And yeah, it's a way that you can also continue your education in learning things that were discussed this evening. So highly recommend this curriculum. Yeah, we would also really love for you to join us in being a member of our community. And so you can become a member and join a community of people who are discussing, how we can transform mental health systems. And so, yeah, if you would like to join us, you can fill out a short form on our website, affirm our principles and values and our community agreements, and then we have a annual due that is also tiered based on what you can give. And we would love for you to be in touch and stay in touch with us. Our website is here, and you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And yeah, would really love to see you at the next event or continuing to be involved. So thank you again for everyone being here tonight, and I hope you take care. Have a lovely, lovely evening.